The station floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Its silver petals stretched outward, catching the light from a distant star. This was Station Veritas, the most important place in the known galaxy. Inside its massive chambers, representatives from 847 different species had gathered. Some walked on 2 legs, some on 6. Others floated in special tanks filled with strange liquids. A few were just clouds of glowing particles held together by magnetic fields. Jiwoo stood near the back of the Grand Assembly Hall, her dark eyes scanning the enormous crowd. She was young for a human diplomat, only 34 years old. Her black hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the plain gray uniform that Earth had chosen for its representatives. Next to her stood Hana, taller and broader with sharp features and calculating eyes. Hana had been a military strategist before joining the diplomatic corps. She kept her arms crossed, watching everything with the careful attention of someone trained to spot danger. The hall itself was breathtaking. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top. Holographic displays floated everywhere, translating the speeches into thousands of languages simultaneously. The air hummed with the sound of breathing, clicking, whistling, and other noises that various species made. At the center of the hall, on a raised platform that seemed to be made of pure light, stood Elder Vormak. He was a member of the crystalline species, beings who looked like walking sculptures made of living diamond. His body pulsed with soft blue light as he prepared to speak. Vormak was old, more than 2,000 years old, and his voice carried the weight of ages. Representatives of the galactic community, Vormak began, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast hall without seeming loud. Today marks a moment that comes only once in a generation. Today we offer the Ascension Trials. A wave of excited sounds rippled through the crowd. Jiwoo felt Hana tense beside her. They had heard rumors about these trials, but no one knew exactly what they involved. Vormak continued, his crystalline form brightening. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council has protected the inner sectors of space. These regions contain technology and knowledge from the Ancient Ones, the first species to reach the stars. Access to these sectors is not given lightly. It must be earned. On the displays around the hall, images appeared. Ancient machines of incredible complexity. Massive structures that defied understanding. Ships that could cross the galaxy in moments. Jiwoo felt her breath catch. As an astrophysicist, she had dreamed of seeing such things her entire life. The Ascension exam has been administered 67 times in our history, Vormak said. His light dimmed slightly. 67 species have attempted it. 67 species have failed. The hall fell silent. Even the usual background noise of so many different life forms ceased. But failure is not the end, Vormak added quickly. Those who attempt the exam and fail are welcomed into our council with full membership. There is no shame in trying. The exam is designed to be nearly impossible. We seek only to understand how each species thinks, how they approach problems, how they face the unwinnable scenario. Jiwoo leaned toward Hana and whispered, "That doesn't sound encouraging." Hana's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "When has that ever stopped us?" Over the next several hours, Vormak explained the rules. Each species that wished to participate would send a small delegation into a simulation. The scenario was always the same. Command a dying generation ship carrying 10,000 refugees while 3 hostile fleets converge on your position. The life support systems are failing. There is no help coming. There is no way to win. The exam measured not whether a species could find a solution, but how they approached impossible problems. What did they prioritize? What did they sacrifice? How did they face absolute failure? The first to attempt the exam were the Velcrin. They were an insectoid species, brilliant strategists who had never lost a war in their 5,000-year history. Their greatest minds entered the simulation chamber and did not emerge for 48 hours. When they finally came out, they presented a document 10,000 pages long, filled with tactical analyses, probability calculations, and strategic frameworks. The Velcrin had identified 17 different approaches ranked by likelihood of success. They had calculated the optimal use of every remaining resource. They had even developed a communication protocol that might convince one of the hostile fleets to show mercy. Elder Vormak reviewed their work in silence. Then he spoke a single word: failed. The Velcrin delegation leader, an ancient warrior named Thalmor, clicked his mandibles in frustration. "Explain," he demanded. Your solution was flawless, Vormak said. But you missed the point. There is no solution. The test is not about finding the right answer. It is about showing us who you are when there is no right answer. Next came the synthetic minds, an ancient collective of artificial intelligences. They entered the simulation and ran quintillions of possible scenarios in microseconds. They explored every possible action, every combination of choices, every potential outcome. They found 3,412 ways to save at least some of the refugees ranked by efficiency. Failed, Vormak said again. The pattern continued. The Scion Collective linked their most powerful telepaths and tried to reach the hostile fleets with pure thought. Failed. The metamorphs used their shape-shifting abilities to attempt infiltration of the enemy ships. Failed. The time-touched species even managed to send a warning back to the ship before the crisis began. Still failed. Jiwoo watched each attempt with growing understanding. She turned to Hana and the other humans in their small delegation. There was Daehyun, a brilliant engineer who could fix anything. Minji, a xenobiologist who had spent years studying alien cultures, and 3 others, each expert in their field. I think I know what they're looking for, Jiwoo said quietly. What? Daehyun asked. They don't want us to win. They want to see what we do when we know we can't win. Hana nodded slowly. So what do humans do when facing certain death? Jiwoo felt a strange smile spreading across her face. We do something stupid. When humanity's turn finally came 3 days into the trials, most species had already failed. Some had given up and gone home. Others remained to watch, curious about how the newest species would handle the exam. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 37 years. They were young, reckless, and confusing to most other species. They made decisions based on something called gut feeling. They formed emotional attachments to things that weren't even alive. They had a bizarre tendency to laugh at serious situations. Jiwoo and Hana walked to the simulation chamber together. The room was a perfect white sphere, empty except for a single chair in the center. The moment they sat down, the simulation would begin. They would experience the scenario as if it were real, making decisions in real time. Elder Vormak's voice echoed through the chamber. You may begin when ready. Remember, there is no time limit. Take as long as you need. Jiwoo looked at Hana. Ready to do something incredibly stupid? Always, Hana replied. They entered the simulation. 90 minutes later, they emerged. The entire hall stared in shock. Every other species had taken days. Some had taken weeks. The humans had finished in 90 minutes and both of them were laughing. The silence in the hall was so complete that Jiwoo could hear her own heartbeat. 847 species. Thousands of individual beings all staring at her and Hana as they stepped out of the simulation chamber. The 2 humans were still grinning, still fighting back laughter. Elder Vormak's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been confusion. In 2,000 years of life, he had seen many things, but he had never seen anyone laugh after the Ascension exam. Explain, Vormak said simply. Jiwoo straightened her uniform and walked to the center platform. Hana followed, her military bearing returning as she faced the assembled representatives. Around them, holographic displays lit up, ready to show whatever the humans wanted to present. We can show you, Jiwoo said. It's easier than explaining. She activated the recording of their simulation. The massive displays around the hall began to play back everything that had happened in those 90 minutes. The simulation started like all the others. The screen showed a massive generation ship, 10 kilometers long, spinning slowly in the void of space. Inside were 10,000 beings, families huddled in cramped corridors, children crying, adults trying to stay calm. The ship's systems were failing. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. The air was growing thin. The temperature was dropping. 3 hostile fleets appeared on the sensors, converging from different directions. Each fleet was powerful enough to destroy the generation ship with a single volley. They were still hours away, but getting closer. There was nowhere to run. The ship's engines were dead. Its weapons were offline. Communication systems were barely functional. This was where every other species had begun their careful calculations. This was where the Velkrin had started building their tactical frameworks. This was where the synthetic minds had begun running their simulations. Instead, Jiwoo and Hana did something that made the watching aliens lean forward in confusion. They threw a party. In the recording, Jiwoo was shown accessing the ship's entertainment systems. She found every piece of music stored in the databases, every movie, every game, every piece of art that the refugees had brought with them. Then she broadcast a message throughout the ship. Attention, everyone. This is your captain speaking. Our ship is dying. 3 enemy fleets are coming to kill us. We have about 6 hours before one of those things destroys us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the biggest, loudest, most ridiculous party this ship has ever seen. We're going to use every bit of remaining power to make these last hours count. We're going to eat all the good food we've been saving. We're going to play all the music. We're going to tell stories and laugh and dance and live right up until the very end. Because if we're going to die, we're going to die on our terms. The recording showed the refugees' reactions. Shock at first, then confusion, then slowly acceptance, and finally something like relief. Someone started playing music. Others began bringing out food. Children who had been crying started to dance. Adults who had been paralyzed with fear started to move, to talk, to live again. In the assembly hall, some species made sounds of disapproval. The Velcrin's Thalmor clicked his mandibles angrily. "This is madness," he said. They gave up. They wasted their remaining resources on foolishness. But Hana held up a hand. "Keep watching," the recording continued. With the party in full swing, Jiwoo did something else. She accessed the barely functional communication system and sent a message to all 3 hostile fleets. The message was simple, almost absurd. "To the 3 fleets currently approaching our position, we're having a party. It's probably going to be our last party ever. You're going to kill us anyway, so there's no harm in asking. Do you want to come? We have music. We have food. We have stories. We're going to die soon, but we'd rather die with friends than alone. If you're curious about who we are, come find out. If not, we understand. Either way, thanks for giving us a few more hours to be together." The Velcrin made a choking sound. "You invited the enemy to your party?" "Yes," Jiwoo said calmly. The recording showed what happened next. 2 of the 3 fleets ignored the message completely. They continued their approach, weapons charged, ready to destroy the generation ship as planned. But the 3rd fleet hesitated. It was a small change, barely noticeable at first. The fleet's formation shifted slightly. Their approach vector changed. Instead of maintaining their attack position, they sent a single scout ship ahead. In the simulation, an hour passed. The party on the generation ship grew louder, more desperate, more alive. People danced like they would never dance again. They sang songs from a dozen different worlds. They told stories about their ancestors, about their hopes, about the children they would never see grow up. Then the scout ship from the 3rd Fleet made contact. A single alien appeared on the communication screen. It was a reptilian creature, scales gleaming, eyes large and curious. "We received your message," the alien said slowly. "We do not understand. You are about to die. Why do you celebrate?" Jiwoo in the recording smiled at the alien. "Because we're alive right now. Because these people deserve to feel joy one more time. Because if the universe is going to take us, we're not going quietly. We're going out singing." The alien was silent for a long moment. Then it said something that changed everything. "May I come aboard? I want to understand." In the real assembly hall, species were leaning forward now. Even the disapproving ones seemed curious. The recording showed the alien scout boarding the generation ship. The alien walked through the corridors, watching humans dance, listening to their music, tasting their food. The refugees welcomed the alien like an old friend, offering drinks, teaching it their dances, telling it their stories. The alien spent 2 hours with them. During that time, something remarkable happened. The alien began to see the refugees not as targets, not as problems, but as people. People who loved and feared and hoped and laughed. When the alien returned to its scout ship, it sent a message back to its fleet. Then it did something that none of the combat simulations had predicted. It began repairing the generation ship's systems. The aliens' people were scavengers and engineers. Their technology was different from what the refugees had, but it was compatible enough. Working quickly, the alien scout ship managed to restore partial power to the generation ship's engines and life support. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to buy time. Enough to send a distress signal that reached further into space. Enough for a nearby science vessel to detect the signal and investigate. In the recording, The science vessel arrived just as the other two hostile fleets reached firing range. But now there was a witness, a neutral party. The fleets withdrew rather than risk an interstellar incident. The generation ship's engines sputtered to life, barely functional but working. The refugees cheered. 8,742 people survived. Not all of them, but most of them. Saved not by brilliant tactics or superior technology, but by one alien's curiosity and the human decision to face death with a smile. The recording ended. The assembly hall remained silent. Elder Vormak's light pulsed slowly. You violated every principle of strategic thinking. You wasted resources. You invited danger closer. You made yourselves vulnerable. Yes, Jiwoo agreed, and yet, you saved more lives than any other species managed in their simulations. Yes. Vormak's crystalline body seemed to dim and brighten several times, as if he were struggling with something. How? How did you know the alien would respond with curiosity instead of violence? Hana stepped forward. We didn't. It was a guess, a hope, a gamble. That is illogical, the synthetic mind representative stated, its mechanical voice echoing through the hall. Yes, Hana said, completely illogical. But that's the point, isn't it? Every species that came before us tried to win through logic. They calculated, they strategized, they optimized. They tried to beat an unbeatable scenario. Jiwoo continued the thought. We did something different. We accepted that we would lose. We accepted that death was coming. That acceptance freed us to try something that made no sense. We stopped trying to win and started trying to live. Daehyun, the human engineer, spoke up from the delegation. You made this test impossible. So we responded with an impossible solution. We threw a party in the face of death. And somehow that absurd choice created a possibility that logic never could have found. Thalmor, the Velkrin warrior, stood up, his insectoid body trembling with emotion. This is not strategy. This is chaos. Yes, Jiwoo said simply. Sometimes chaos is better than strategy. Sometimes being ridiculous is better than being right. The hall erupted into noise. Species began arguing with each other, debating in hundreds of languages. Some were angry, claiming the humans had cheated somehow. Others were fascinated, asking questions about human psychology. Still others were laughing, their own species' versions of laughter creating a strange symphony of sound. Elder Vormak raised one crystalline limb, and silence gradually returned. The council will deliberate, he announced. This result is unprecedented. We must consider carefully what it means. As the human delegation was escorted to their quarters to wait, Jiwoo felt Hana's hand on her shoulder. Think we passed? Hana asked quietly. Jiwoo shook her head. I don't know. But at least we were honest. We showed them exactly who humans are. 3 days passed while the Galactic Council deliberated. 3 long days where the human delegation waited in their quarters on Station Veritas. The rooms were comfortable but felt like a cage. Jiwoo spent most of her time staring out the window at the stars, wondering what decision was being made in the chambers below. Hana practiced combat forms to stay calm. Daehyun took apart and reassembled every piece of technology in their quarters, just to keep his hands busy. Minji, the xenobiologist, wrote detailed notes about every species she had observed, trying to understand what made each of them unique. But one member of their delegation was not waiting quietly. Someone was a historian, small and thin with sharp eyes that never seemed to stop moving. She had gray streaks in her black hair even though she was only 40 years old. While the others worried about the council's decision, Soman had other questions on her mind. Why hasn't any species passed this exam in 3,000 years? She asked on the second day. Jinho, the team's cryptographer and data specialist, looked up from his tablet. He was young, barely 25, with nervous energy that made him tap his fingers constantly. Maybe it really is that hard? No, Soman said, shaking her head. Hard, yes, but impossible. For 3,000 years? For 67 different species, each with their own ways of thinking? The probability of that is essentially 0. What are you saying? Jiwoo asked. I'm saying something doesn't add up. I want to look at the historical records. The real records, not the public summaries, Hana frowned. They won't let you access those. They're restricted. Soman smiled, a small, dangerous expression. I didn't say I would ask permission. Over the next day and night, while the council continued their deliberations, Soman worked. She used every trick she had learned in 30 years of studying ancient cultures. She found gaps in the station's security, digital backdoors that had been forgotten over centuries. Jinho helped, his fingers flying over holographic keyboards, breaking encryption that was older than human civilization. They worked in secret, telling no one else what they were doing. Not because they didn't trust their teammates, but because they wanted to protect them. If Soman and Jinho got caught, it would be better if the others could honestly say they knew nothing about it. On the third night, Soman finally broke through to the deepest archives. What she found made her blood run cold. She woke Jiwoo first, then Hana, then the others. They gathered in the small common area of their quarters, speaking in whispers even though the room was supposed to be secure. "Tell me I'm wrong," Soman said, her voice shaking slightly. She pulled up her findings on a portable display. "Tell me I'm misunderstanding what I found." Jiwoo looked at the ancient documents written in languages that Soman had spent hours translating. Her eyes widened as she read. The Ascension exam had been created 3,000 years ago by a species called the Architects. They had been the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known. Their technology seemed like magic. Their understanding of the universe went far beyond what any current species could comprehend. But the Architects were gone now, extinct. And according to the documents Soman had found, they had created the exam with a very specific purpose. "It's not a test," Jiwoo whispered. "It's a filter." "Yes," Soman confirmed. The Architects believed that any species advanced enough to reach the stars would eventually face extinction-level threats. Not wars or disasters, but something worse. Something they called the challenge of consciousness itself. Hana leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Soman pulled up another document. The Architects discovered something in the deep sectors of space. The documents aren't clear about what exactly. But whatever it was, it could only be survived by species who think in a certain way. Species who can face the impossible and not break. Species who can laugh at death. "Like humans did," Daehyun said quietly. "Like humans did," Soman agreed. "But here's the thing. Every species that failed the exam was offered membership in the Galactic Council. They were given access to trade routes, technology, knowledge, everything except entry to the inner circle and the ancient sectors." "That sounds fair," Minji said. "Does it?" Soman's eyes were hard. "Look at what happened to them. I traced the history of all 67 species that took the exam. Within a few generations of joining the council, something changed in each of them. They became more cautious, more logical, more focused on stability and order. Not a single one of them ever tried anything genuinely innovative again." Jinho added, "The council's structure encourages it. Every decision requires consensus. Every action needs approval. It's designed to prevent change." "The Architects didn't create this test to find worthy species," Jiwoo said, understanding dawning on her face. "They created it to trap everyone else. Keep them safe, keep them comfortable, keep them from ever reaching the ancient sectors." "But why?" Hana demanded. "What's in those sectors that needs to be protected?" Soman pulled up the final document she had found. It was badly corrupted, with huge sections missing, but what remained was enough to make her hands shake as she read it aloud. "Warning to those who find this record. We, the Architects, failed to pass our own test. We believed logic and reason were supreme. We built our civilization on rationality, and when we encountered the presence in the deep sectors, our rationality destroyed us. We created this exam to find a species capable of surviving what we could not. A species that thinks differently. A species that can face entropy itself and laugh." The room fell silent. Outside the window, stars shone with cold, distant light. "Entropy?" Daehyun finally asked. "That's just a physics concept. The gradual decline of all systems into disorder." "Unless it's not just a concept," Soman said. "Unless the Architects found something that makes entropy conscious. Something that actively works to break down hope, creativity, possibility itself." Minji shuddered. "That's terrifying." "Yes," Jiwoo agreed. "And if I'm understanding this correctly, we're about to be given access to the sectors where this thing exists." Hana stood up and began pacing. "We need to tell the others. The council, everyone, do we?" Jinho asked nervously. "We broke a dozen laws accessing this information. They could imprison us, ban humanity from the galactic community entirely." "He's right," Daehyun said. "We need to think about this carefully." Jiwoo looked at each of them, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their faces. They were so far from Earth, so far from any help. Whatever decision they made now would affect not just themselves, but every human alive. When does the council announce their decision? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Hana replied. In about 6 hours. Then we have 6 hours to decide what to do with this information. They talked through the night, voices low and urgent. They argued about duty and safety, about truth and consequences. Selman wanted to release everything immediately, to expose what the council had been hiding. Jinho argued for caution, for protecting humanity's position. Hana suggested taking the information back to Earth and letting the government decide. But Jiwoo kept thinking about the exam, about the party they had thrown in the face of death, about the absurd choice that had somehow worked. We did something crazy in the simulation, she said as the artificial dawn began to brighten outside their window. We made a choice that made no logical sense. And it worked because it was honest. It was true to who we are. What are you suggesting? Someone asked. I'm suggesting we do the same thing now. We tell the truth. We show the council what we found. We let them know that we know what this exam really is. And then we refuse to be trapped by it. Refuse? Daehyun looked shocked. You mean turn down ascension? Do you know what Earth's government will say? The technology in those sectors could advance humanity by centuries. Only if we survive to use it, Jiwoo countered. Only if we stay true to what makes us human in the first place. Hana stopped pacing and looked at Jiwoo. You're serious about this? Yes, it's insane. It's career suicide. They might throw us all in prison. Probably. But it's the right thing to do. Yes. Hana laughed, a short bark of sound. When we get back to Earth, remind me never to play cards with you. You're too willing to bet everything on principle. Is that a yes? Jiwoo asked. Hana nodded. Slowly, one by one, the others nodded too. Even Jinho, despite his obvious fear. Then we need a plan, Somin said. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. We can't just walk into the council chamber and start making accusations. They spent the remaining hours preparing. Solman organized the evidence carefully, creating a presentation that would be impossible to deny. Jinho set up secure backups and prepared to send copies to Earth if things went wrong. Daehyun and Minji wrote a statement explaining humanity's position. Jiwoo and Hana simply sat together, watching the stars and gathering their courage. When the summons finally came, when Elder Vormak's voice echoed through their quarters asking them to attend the council chamber, they were ready. They walked through the station's corridors together, 7 humans about to face the entire galactic community, about to challenge 3,000 years of carefully maintained order. Are we really doing this? Jinho whispered. Yes, Jiwoo said firmly. We're going to fail, he said. Jiwoo smiled. Probably. But we're human. Failing is what we do best. It's what we do next that matters. The council chamber felt different this time. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation. Every representative sat perfectly still, waiting to hear Elder Vormak's announcement. Jiwoo could feel thousands of eyes watching her delegation as they took their places. Vormak's crystalline body blazed with bright light as he rose to address the assembly. His voice carried the weight of an ancient decision, one that would echo through galactic history. We have deliberated for 3 days, Vormak began. We have reviewed the human simulation countless times. We have debated the meaning of their approach. We have consulted the oldest records and the wisest minds among us. He paused, his light pulsing slowly. For the first time in 3,000 years, a species has passed the ascension exam. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered. Others made sounds of outrage or disbelief. The Velkrin's Thalmor stood up, his mandibles clicking furiously. But the noise was too great for anyone to hear his objections. Vormak raised a crystalline limb, and silence gradually returned. Humanity has demonstrated the quality we have sought for millennia. The ability to face the impossible without surrender, the courage to choose life even when death is certain, the wisdom to value connection over calculation. His form brightened even more. Therefore, by unanimous decision of the inner circle, humanity is granted full access to the ancient sectors and all the knowledge they contain. Welcome to Ascension. Jiwoo stood up. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. We refuse. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for several seconds that felt like hours. Then the chamber exploded into chaos again, louder than before. Voices shouted in languages human ears couldn't process. Holographic displays flickered wildly. Several species demanded order, demanded explanation, demanded that the humans be removed from the chamber. Silence. Vormak's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The old being's light had dimmed to almost nothing, a sign of deep shock among his people. Explain yourself. Jiwoo walked to the center platform. Behind her, Somin and the others came forward carrying the evidence they had gathered. We need to show you something first. Something we found in your archives. You accessed restricted records? The synthetic mind representative's mechanical voice held what might have been anger. That is a violation of laws designed to keep certain truths hidden, Jiwoo interrupted. Yes, we broke your rules. But before you punish us, please look at what we discovered. Somin activated the presentation. The ancient documents appeared on every display in the chamber, translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. The truth about the architects. The real purpose of the exam. The warning about what waited in the deep sectors. As the representatives read, reactions rippled through the crowd. Some species clearly knew nothing about this. Their surprise and confusion were obvious. But others, particularly the older species who had been on the council longest, showed no shock at all. They had known. They had always known. This is outrageous, Thalmor declared, but his mandibles had stopped clicking. He was reading the documents with growing understanding. The exam was never about worthiness. It was about finding someone desperate enough or foolish enough to face an existential threat. Yes, Jiwoo confirmed. The architects didn't create a test. They created bait, and every species that failed was welcomed into the council, specifically to keep them safe and docile, to prevent them from ever developing the kind of thinking that might actually survive what's out there. Elder Vormak's light remained dim. And what do you propose, humans? That we expose everyone to this danger? That we allow chaos and destruction in the name of freedom? No! Hana stepped forward, her military training evident in her posture. We propose something different. We propose that humanity enters the ancient sectors, but not alone. We share everything we find, every discovery, every danger, every piece of knowledge. We face this threat together as equals. Impossible, the synthetic mind stated. The ancient sectors are vast. Sharing information with 847 species simultaneously would require a massive coordinated effort. Daehyun finished. Yes, we know. We're willing to do it anyway. Minji added. Every species here has something unique to offer. Different ways of thinking, different approaches to problems. The architects failed because they relied on logic alone. Maybe the answer is to combine all our different perspectives. A new voice spoke up from the crowd. It was surprising because it came from Thalmor, the Velkrin warrior who had been so critical of humanity's approach. The humans have a point, he said slowly. My people pride ourselves on our strategic thinking. We failed the exam because we tried to win through calculation. But perhaps if Velkrin's strategy was combined with human intuition, with synthetic processing power, with psion empathy. He trailed off. Considering the possibilities, the chamber began to buzz with conversation. Species were talking to each other, debating, considering. Jiwoo saw something she had never seen before in the council chamber. Real discussion. Real exchange of ideas. Not the careful, controlled consensus building that normally happened, but genuine exploration of possibilities. Elder Vormak watched this unfold. His light began to brighten again, slowly, thoughtfully. You would share the secrets of the ancient sectors with everyone, even those who might use that knowledge against humanity? Yes, Jiwoo said, because keeping secrets is what got the architects killed. They tried to protect knowledge, to control it. That's probably what made them vulnerable in the first place. And if we refuse your proposal? Vormak asked. If the council decides to maintain the current system? Jiwoo met the ancient being's gaze directly. Then humanity will refuse ascension. We'll go back to Earth. We'll stay on the edges of council space and develop on our own. We won't be trapped by your system. We won't let you make us safe and comfortable and stagnant. That is foolish, Vormak said, but his tone was almost admiring. You would reject technology that could advance your civilization by centuries? If the price is losing what makes us human? Yes, absolutely, Hana spoke up again. We threw a party on a dying ship because that's who we are. We chose life over logic. We can't stop being that way just because you offer us an easier path. If we did, we'd fail the real test. We'd become just another species that chose comfort over growth. The synthetic mind representative processed this for several moments. Then it spoke, and for the first time its mechanical voice carried something that sounded like emotion. We have existed for 10,000 years. We have calculated the optimal solution to every problem we have encountered, and yet we failed your exam in microseconds. Perhaps optimal is not the same as correct. A small floating being made of glowing particles drifted forward. It spoke in a voice like wind chimes. I people, the Luminars, have wondered for generations why we feel so still, so unchanging. We thought it was wisdom. Maybe it was just fear more species began to speak up, each one sharing doubts they had held for years, questions they had never been allowed to ask. The careful order of the council chamber was breaking down, and something more honest was emerging in its place. Elder Vormak raised his limb again, but this time not to demand silence. To acknowledge what was happening. It seems the humans have started something that cannot be easily stopped. Very well, we will vote. Not just the inner circle, but all representatives. Every species will decide. Decide what? Someone asked. Whether to maintain the current system or to accept humanity's proposal. To enter the ancient sectors together, sharing all knowledge and all risks equally. To face whatever waits there, not as a hierarchy, but as a community. The vote took hours. Some species required time to consult with their homeworlds. Others needed to debate among themselves. The Velkrin delegation argued so loudly that security had to be called twice to ensure no one was injured. But slowly, steadily, the votes came in. Species that had been part of the council for centuries voted to change everything. New species voted for the chance to be part of something unprecedented. Even some members of the inner circle, beings who stood to lose the most power, voted for humanity's proposal. When the final count was announced, Jiwoo felt her knees go weak. 703 species in favor, 124 against. 20 abstentions. They had won. Impossibly, absurdly, they had won. But Vormak's next words reminded them what winning really meant. The ancient sectors contain more than technology and knowledge. They contain the threat that destroyed the architects. By accepting humanity's proposal, we have all agreed to face that danger together. His light pulsed with something that might have been fear. I have lived for 2,000 years. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. And I tell you now honestly that I do not know if we will survive what comes next. Jiwoo nodded. Neither do we. But at least we'll face it together. At least we'll face it as ourselves. When do we begin? Thalmor asked, and there was excitement in his clicking mandibles now. Immediately, Hana said. We'll need to form coalition teams. Mix species together. Combine our different strengths. Daehyun was already pulling up technical specifications. We'll need specialized chips, equipment that can handle unknown conditions, and communication systems that can share data in real time across hundreds of worlds. 6 months later, the coalition fleet gathered at the edge of the ancient sectors, 300 ships from 147 different species, all preparing to cross a boundary that had been forbidden for 3,000 years. Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, a massive exploration ship built by combining technology from a dozen different civilizations. Next to her, Hana monitored tactical displays while Daehyun worked on keeping the experimental engine stable. The ancient sectors looked peaceful from a distance. Just stars and darkness, the same as anywhere else in the galaxy. But the old records warned that appearances were deceiving. The architects had left automated defenses, strange spatial anomalies, and worst of all, the presence they had only described as entropy made conscious. All ships report ready, Minji announced from her station. She had been working as a liaison between the coalition species, helping them understand each other's communication styles and cultural needs. It had been exhausting work, but somehow the alliance had held together through 6 months of preparation. Elder Vormak's voice came through the communication system. He was aboard one of the crystalline ships, insisting on being part of the expedition despite his age. This is our final opportunity to reconsider. Once we cross into the ancient sectors, there is no guarantee we can return. The architect's warnings were clear about the danger. Jiwoo activated her microphone, broadcasting to all 300 ships. Every species here chose to come, not because it was safe, but because it was right. Because we believe facing the unknown together is better than hiding alone. Whatever happens next, we face it as we are. Honestly, bravely, and maybe a little bit stupidly. Laughter echoed across the communication channels. Different species, different sounds, but all expressing the same emotion. Nervousness transformed into determination through humor. It was such a human response that Jiwoo felt a surge of pride seeing it spread to others. All ships, Hana commanded. Advance. The fleet moved forward as one. As they crossed the invisible boundary into the ancient sectors, space itself seemed to change. The stars looked different somehow, their light taking on strange colors. Sensors registered readings that made no sense. Dahyun's instruments showed energy patterns that shouldn't exist. Getting strange data here, he reported. Space-time is more flexible in this region. Like reality itself is less solid. Somin, who had joined the expedition as the Coalition's historian, pulled up her research. The architects mentioned this. They called it the thinning. Areas where the normal laws of physics become optional. The fleet continued deeper into the ancient sectors, following coordinates from the old records. They were searching for the architect's final outpost, a station called the Last Archive. It would contain answers about what had happened to them and what they had discovered. It took 3 days of careful navigation to reach the station. When it finally appeared on their sensors, even the synthetics expressed something like awe. The Last Archive was enormous, a structure that could have housed 1 billion beings, but it was dark and silent, orbiting a dying red star that barely provided enough light to see by. Life support still functioning, Minji reported as they prepared to board. Atmosphere is breathable for most species. Temperature is cold but manageable. A mixed team prepared to explore the station. Humans, Velcrin, synthetics, science, and dozens of others. They had trained together for months, learning to work as a unit despite their differences. Thalmor led the tactical element while Jiwoo coordinated the scientific team. The interior of the station was haunting. Corridors stretched for kilometers, empty and echoing. The architecture was beautiful but alien, following design principles that human eyes struggled to understand. Lights flickered on as they passed, activated by systems that had waited 3,000 years for visitors. Spread out in teams, Jiwoo ordered. Stay in communication. Report anything unusual immediately. They explored for hours, finding abandoned living quarters, vast laboratories, massive data archives. The architects had left everything behind, as if they had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routines. Salmon discovered the central archive chamber. Inside, crystalline storage devices held the complete history of the architects. Jinho immediately began working on accessing the data, his fingers flying over holographic interfaces as he decoded ancient encryption. I'm getting something, he said excitedly. It's a log, the final log of the Architect Council. The holographic recording activated. A being appeared, similar in appearance to Elder Vormak but larger and more complex in structure. Its light pulsed weakly as it spoke. This is Chief Architect Luminex. I am recording this as our final act. The entity we discovered in the deep sectors has consumed us, not our bodies but our minds, our ability to dream, to hope, to imagine anything beyond what we already know. The recording showed other architects in the background, sitting motionless, their lights dim and flickering. We thought consciousness was about logic and reason. We built our entire civilization on rational thought, and when we encountered a force that feeds on possibility itself, our rationality became our weakness. We calculated ourselves into paralysis. The architect's form dimmed further. We created the Ascension exam hoping to find a species different from us. A species that thinks with more than just logic. A species that can face entropy's whisper and respond with something we never could. We never found them in our lifetime. But if someone is watching this recording, then perhaps you are that species. The image flickered. The entity is not evil. It is not conscious in any way we understand. It simply is. It exists at the boundary between order and chaos, feeding on the potential energy of new possibilities. Every creative thought, every moment of hope, every spark of something genuinely new draws its attention. And once it focuses on a civilization, it begins to drain that civilization's ability to create, to grow, to change. Luminex's light pulsed one final time. We could not survive because we could not adapt. Our logic led us to the same conclusions every time, and those conclusions all ended in despair. But a species that thinks differently, that can approach the same problem from infinite directions, that can laugh at impossibility and try anyway, such a species might endure what we could not. The recording ended. The chamber fell silent as everyone processed what they had heard. So it's real, Hana said quietly. Entropy made conscious, a force that feeds on creativity and hope. And it destroyed the most advanced civilization in galactic history, Thalmor added, his mandibles clicking nervously. What chance do we have against such a thing? Before anyone could answer, all the lights in the station flickered and went dark. Emergency systems kicked in a moment later, but the darkness seemed to linger as if it was more than just an absence of light. Did everyone feel that? Minji asked, her voice tight with fear. Yes. Several voices answered at once. Jiwoo felt it too. A strange pressure in her mind, like someone was pressing down on her thoughts. Ideas felt harder to grasp. Hope felt distant. Even her emotions seemed muted, as if filtered through layers of gray fog. It's here, Somin whispered. The entity. It knows we're here. The pressure increased. Jiwoo watched as species around her began to react. The synthetics stopped moving, trapped in calculation loops. The Scions clutched their heads, overwhelmed by the psychic weight. Even Thalmor stood frozen, unable to choose between tactical options because they all seemed equally futile. This was how the architects had died, paralyzed by their own ability to see every reason why hope was illogical. Jiwoo felt the same pressure trying to crush her thoughts. She could feel herself starting to calculate the probability of survival, starting to list all the logical reasons they should give up. The entity was feeding on her capacity to think creatively, draining it away. But then she remembered the exam, the party on the dying ship, the absurd choice that had saved thousands of lives. She started to laugh. It wasn't funny. Nothing about this situation was funny. They were facing something that had destroyed beings far greater than themselves. But that's exactly why she laughed. Because it was absurd. Because logic said they should despair, which meant logic was wrong. Hana heard her and understood immediately. She started laughing too, a sharp bark of defiant humor. Daehyun joined in, then Minji, then the other humans. The sound echoed through the dark station, completely inappropriate and absolutely necessary. And something remarkable happened. The pressure in their minds lessened. Not much, but enough. Enough to think again. Enough to hope. That's it, Jiwoo shouted. It can't handle irrationality. When we stop being logical, it loses its grip. She activated her communicator. All ships, this is Jiwoo. The entity is here. It's trying to drain your hope by making you think too much. Don't let it. Do something stupid. Sing, dance, tell jokes. Be absurd. There was confusion at first. Then slowly other species began to understand. The Velkrins started performing their battle chants, songs of glory that made no tactical sense. The synthetics began running random number generators, deliberately choosing illogical options. Even the Scions started broadcasting memories of joy and wonder instead of trying to analyze the threat. The station filled with noise. Music, laughter, shouts, and sounds that had never been heard together before.